They laughed when a homeless girl touched the billion-dollar engine. She stood there in torn clothes, dust on her hands, while some of the best engineers in the world watched her like she didn't belong. "Step back," one of them said. "This isn't for people like you." But she didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just looked at the machine like it was speaking to her. The same machine that had cost billions. The same engine that German and Japanese experts had failed to fix. The same project that was slowly destroying a billionaire's reputation. Then she said something that made them laugh even harder. "It's not broken. It's just out of balance." More laughter, mockery, disbelief until the billionaire spoke. Let her try. Silence. She stepped forward. No tools and no degree and no fear. Just instinct. She made a few small adjustments so simple they almost looked like nothing. Then she stepped back and said, "Start it." They hesitated because if this failed again, it would prove them right. But the billionaire gave the order. "Run it." The engine powered on. Same sound, same build-up, same moment where everything always went wrong. Except this time didn't. No shaking and no failure and no shutdown. Just smooth, controlled power. The room went silent. The laughter disappeared. And every engineer in that room slowly turned to look at her, because the homeless girl they mocked had just done what none of them could. Before we dive into how all of this began, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Because this story is not just about a homeless girl and a billionaire. It's about hidden genius, second chances, and a moment that changed everything. You don't want to miss what happens next. Subscribe now and let's go back to where it all started. At 32, Okafor had already become the kind of man people spoke about in lowered voices. Not because they feared him, but because they couldn't quite understand him. He was the kind of billionaire who didn't inherit wealth. He built it. Every naira, every empire, every company that carried his name had once been nothing more than a thought in his mind. And somehow he had turned those thoughts into reality. Oil logistics, real estate, tech, manufacturing, aviation, contracts. Everything he touched seemed to rise. And because of that, the world had quietly agreed on one thing. Okafor did not fail. Until now. The massive glass walls of his private research facility reflected the dim orange glow of the evening sun, stretching shadows across polished floors and silent corridors. Inside, however, there was no beauty in the light, only tension, heavy, suffocating tension. Engineers moved quickly. Their voices, hushed but urgent. Screens flickered with data streams. Monitors displayed performance charts that no one wanted to look at anymore. At the center of it all sat the machine, the engine. Sleek, complex, revolutionary in design, and completely useless. Okafor stood on the observation platform above the test bay. His arms folded tightly across his chest. His jaw was clenched, his expression unreadable. But his eyes were tired. Not the tiredness that sleep could fix, the kind that came from watching something you believed in slowly collapse. "Run it again," he said. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. Below him, the lead engineer hesitated for half a second before signaling the team. "Test cycle initiate." The room shifted into motion. Systems powered on. Lights blinked to life. The low hum of machinery filled the air as the engine began to awaken. For a moment, just a moment, everything felt right. The numbers on the screen climbed steadily. Temperature stable. Pressure within range. Fuel injection optimal. A flicker of hope moved through the room. Even Okafor leaned forward slightly. Then a sharp, unnatural vibration. One of the monitors flashed red. "Sir, pressure imbalance." Another voice followed quickly. Combustion instability detected. The engine let out a violent choking roar, as if something inside it was fighting itself, and then shut down. Silence complete and devastating. The only sound left was the slow mechanical ticking of cooling metal. No one spoke. No one moved. Because no one needed to say it. It had failed. Again. Okafor didn't react immediately. He didn't shout. Thought he didn't move. He just stood there staring down at the machine. The machine that had consumed 3 years of his life. 3 years of sleepless nights. 3 years of relentless investment. 3 years of belief. Gone. Just like that. Finally, he exhaled slowly and turned away. Reset the system, he said quietly. We'll review the data in an hour. His composure was almost unsettling, but those who worked closely with him knew better. The silence, it was worse than anger. Inside his private office, the atmosphere was no lighter. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, now glowing with evening lights. From up here, everything looked small, controlled, predictable, unlike what he had just left behind. Okafor loosened his tie and walked toward the bar at the corner of the room. He poured himself a drink, not out of habit, but out of necessity. He took a slow sip, then another. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. Sharp suit, perfect posture. A man who had everything under control. But behind that image, cracks. For the first time in years, Okafor felt something unfamiliar, pressing against his chest. Doubt. A soft knock came at the door. Come in. His head engineer stepped in cautiously. Sir. Okafor didn't turn. Say it. The engineer swallowed. We've reviewed the last 3 test cycles. The issue is consistent. Okafor let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Consistently failing. Yes, sir. Silence lingered. Then the engineer continued, choosing his words carefully. We've tried. Multiple adjustments, fuel ratios, airflow distribution, thermal, shielding. But the imbalance keeps reappearing. It's like the system is rejecting itself. That phrase hung in the air. Rejecting itself. Okafor turned slowly, his eyes narrowing slightly. That's not possible. We thought so too, sir, but every model we run, every simulation, it all points to the same thing. And what exactly is that? Okafor asked. The engineer hesitated. A fundamental flaw in the design. The room went still. Okafor stared at him, not angrily but intensely. Be very careful, he said quietly, about what you're implying. I'm not questioning your vision, sir, the engineer said quickly, but something in the core structure isn't aligning with real-world conditions. Okafor walked closer, his presence suddenly overwhelming. Do you know how many people told me my ideas wouldn't work? The engineer said. Nothing. Every single company I've built, someone said it was impossible. He stopped just inches away. And every single time they were wrong. The engineer lowered his gaze. Yes, sir. Okafor stepped back, running a hand through his hair. Get the German team back on this, he said. I want fresh eyes. They already reviewed it last week, sir. Then fly them in again. Pause. And the Japanese specialists. Okafor's expression hardened. Bring them too. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The facility became a battleground of ideas, calculations, and growing frustration. The Germans approached the problem with precision, breaking down every component, analyzing each system with surgical detail. The Japanese engineers brought discipline, refining, adjusting, seeking harmony within the machine, and still nothing worked. Every test ended the same way. Promising start, a sudden imbalance, a catastrophic shutdown. It was as if the engine refused to exist. Sleep became a stranger to Okafor. He spent nights in the lab staring at data, replaying simulations, questioning everything. He stopped attending social events, stopped answering unnecessary calls, stopped being human, because this engine was no longer just a project. It was a challenge to his identity. If this failed, what did that make him? One night long after everyone else had left, Okafor stood alone in the test bay. The massive engine loomed before him in silence, cold, still mocking. He walked closer, placing a hand on its metallic surface. "I built you," he murmured. No response, just the faint echo of his own voice. He clenched his jaw. "Why won't you work?" Of course, there was no answer, but in that moment it felt like the machine was speaking anyway, not in words, but in resistance. By the third year, the whispers had begun. Investors were getting nervous. Competitors were watching closely. The media started asking questions. Is Okafor's latest project a failure? Has the billionaire finally met his match? He ignored them all, but deep down the noise was getting louder. Another failed test, another silent room, another weight added to his chest. This time he didn't stay. He walked out before anyone could speak, past the engineers, past the assistants, past the glass walls that once reflected his success. Outside, the night air hit his face. Cool, still, real. He stood there for a moment, breathing slowly, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his car keys. For the first time in a long time, he didn't have a plan. He didn't have a meeting. He didn't have control. And strangely, that felt necessary. He got into his car and started the engine. The smooth purr of it was almost ironic. Here was a machine that worked perfectly, effortlessly, without question, and yet the one he had spent years creating refused. Okafor leaned back slightly, gripping the steering wheel. His reflection stared back at him again from the windshield. But this time he didn't look away. For the first time in years, the man who could not fail was beginning to understand something dangerous, something unfamiliar, something real. Failure was no longer a possibility. It was already happening, and he had no idea how to stop it. The engine purred beneath him, smooth, obedient, predictable. It almost felt like mockery. Okafor sat behind the wheel of his car, staring ahead at the long stretch of road that disappeared into the dim glow of the evening. The city lights shimmered in the distance, alive with movement, noise, ambition. Everything out there still believed in him. They didn't know. They couldn't see the cracks forming beneath the surface of the empire he had built. His grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. For years, his life had followed a pattern: precision, structure, control. Every meeting planned, every move calculated, every outcome anticipated. But tonight he had none of that. No driver, no security convoy, no destination. Just him and the road. He pressed the accelerator. The car responded instantly, gliding forward, like it understood its purpose. Within minutes, he had left the familiar high-rise districts behind. The polished glass buildings gave way to older structures, narrower roads, and a different rhythm of life. Street lights flickered inconsistently here. Small shops lined the roadside, some still open, some closing for the night. Hawkers called out lazily, their voices softer, now tired from a full day's work. The smell of roasted corn drifted faintly through the air, mixing with dust and petrol fumes. Okafor slowed slightly. This part of town didn't care about billionaires. It didn't care about innovation, or failed engines, or global recognition. Here, survival was immediate, simple, honest, and for some reason that made him feel smaller. He passed a group of mechanics gathered around a half-open car hood. Their hands were dark with grease, their clothes worn, their laughter unfiltered. One of them said something that made the others burst out laughing. Okafor watched them briefly. There was something in that moment that unsettled him, not because they were poor, but because they looked free. Free from expectation, free from pressure, free from the invisible weight he carried every day. He exhaled slowly and looked away. Focus, he muttered to himself, but even that felt pointless. What exactly was he focusing on? Another failure waiting for him tomorrow. Another test that would collapse. Another room full of brilliant minds pretending they understood a problem no one could solve. He drove further. The roads became quieter. Buildings thinned out. The noise of the city faded into something softer, more distant. For the first time in a long while there was silence. Real silence. No buzzing phones and no urgent emails. And no engineers waiting for instructions. Just the steady hum of his car and the rhythm of the road beneath it. It should have felt peaceful, but instead his thoughts grew louder. What if they're right? The question slipped into his mind without warning. He frowned. No, he shook his head slightly as if physically rejecting the idea. They've been wrong before. And it was true. Countless times people had doubted him. Investors had laughed at his early proposals. Experts had dismissed his ideas. Competitors had underestimated him, and every single time he had proven them wrong. So why was this different? Why did this feel heavier? Another thought crept in. What if this time it's not them? His jaw tightened. That one lingered. Because deep down, beneath all the confidence and control, there was a quiet realization forming. This wasn't like his past challenges. This wasn't a business deal he could negotiate. This wasn't a market he could dominate. This was something else. Something stubborn. Something that refused to bend to his will. The road ahead curved gently. Okafor followed it, barely paying attention now. His mind was too busy replaying every failed test, every red warning signal, every silent room filled with unspoken disappointment. He remembered the way his engineers avoided eye contact after each failure, the careful tone in their voices, the hesitation. They were losing confidence, not just in the project, in him. That thought hit harder than anything else. Suddenly a strange sound, subtle at first, then sharper. A sputtering noise from beneath the hood. Okafor frowned, glancing at the dashboard. Everything looked normal, but the sound persisted. A slight jerk followed, then another. What? He eased his foot off the accelerator. The car didn't respond smoothly this time. Instead, it struggled. A weak, uneven movement forward, then a cough, a violent shudder, and finally silence. The car rolled to a stop by the side of the road. Stillness settled around him. For a moment, Okafor just sat there, hands on the wheel, eyes forward, processing. Then he let out a quiet, disbelieving breath. "You've got to be kidding me." He tried the ignition. The engine turned, but didn't catch. Again. Nothing. A humorless laugh escaped him. $1 billion naira car. He leaned back in his seat, staring up at the darkening sky through the blank sky. Windshield. And this is how you choose to behave. It would have been funny under different circumstances, but right now felt like insult added to injury. He stepped out of the car. The air was cooler now, carrying the faint sounds of distant conversations and occasional passing vehicles. Okafor walked around to the front and opened the hood. He stared at the engine. Clean, advanced, immaculate, and completely meaningless to him in that moment. He knew business. He knew strategy. He knew how to build empires. But this was different. He reached in, slightly hesitating, then stopped. He didn't know what he was looking for, didn't know what to touch, didn't know what was wrong. For the first time in a very long time, Okafor stood in front of a problem and had absolutely no idea how to solve it. Car passed by without slowing, then another. No one stopped, no one cared. And why would they? To them, he was just another man with a broken car on the side of the road. Not a billionaire, not a visionary, Not a man who could not fail. Just a man stranded. He closed the hood slowly. Frustration began to creep in again. Not loud, not explosive, but steady, persistent, the kind that built quietly beneath the surface. He ran a hand through his hair and exhaled. Perfect, he muttered. Just perfect. First the engine, now this. It was almost poetic. He looked around. The road wasn't entirely deserted. A few people moved about in the distance. A small roadside stall glowed under a dim bulb. Somewhere nearby a radio played softly. Life was continuing unbothered by his situation. That realization struck him in a strange way. For so long his world had revolved around control, influence, and impact. But out here none of that mattered. Out here he was irrelevant. And oddly enough that felt real. Minutes passed, maybe more. Time felt slower here. Okafor leaned against his car, arms folded, staring at nothing in particular. His mind was quieter now, not because he had found answers, but because he was too tired to keep asking questions. Then footsteps, soft, unhurried. He didn't turn immediately, but he heard them, felt them. Someone was approaching, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he straightened, slightly alert, curious. The footsteps stopped a few meters away. A voice followed. Calm, steady, unexpected. Your fuel line is choking. The words didn't sound like a guess. They sounded like a conclusion. Okafor turned slowly, his brows pulling together in mild confusion. Standing a few steps away from him was a woman he hadn't noticed before. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about her. At least nothing the world would consider remarkable. Her clothes were worn and faded, the fabric thin from years of daddy use. The slippers on her feet looked like they had survived too many seasons. Her hair, though thick and naturally full, was uncombed, falling loosely around her face. There was dust on her skin, the kind that clings to someone who lives more outdoors than indoors. A homeless woman, or at least that's what most people would have seen. But Okafor didn't look away because something didn't match. It wasn't her appearance. It was her posture, the way she stood, balanced, grounded, unbothered. The way her eyes held his, not with fear, not with curiosity, but with quiet certainty. And her voice, there had been no hesitation in it, no doubt. You said something, Okafor asked, straightening slightly. She nodded toward the car. Your fuel line is choking. There's air entering where it shouldn't. Okafor let out a short breath, half amused, half irritated. And you know this, how exactly? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped closer to the car, her attention already shifting to the engine, as if his question wasn't the important thing in the moment. Open it, she said simply. Okafor blinked. He wasn't used to being spoken to like that, not rudely, but directly, without ceremony, without hesitation. For a brief second, his instinct was to challenge her, to remind her who he was, to question her confidence, to dismiss her entirely, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she had said it, or the fact that he had absolutely no solution of his own. Either way, he reached forward and lifted the hood again. The engine sat there, clean and silent, its polished surfaces reflecting the faint glow of nearby streetlights. The woman stepped closer. Now that she was near, Okafor could see her more clearly. Her hands, they were rough, not just dirty, but worked, the kind of hands that had held tools, tightened bolts, handled metal and heat. Hands that had done more than survive, hands that had built. She leaned slightly over the engine, her eyes scanning it with focus that felt practiced, not curious, not cautious, familiar. Okafor watched her closely. There was no show in her movements, no hesitation, no second-guessing, just quiet observation. She reached in, adjusting something lightly with her fingers, then paused, listening. Not to him, but to the engine itself, as if it could speak. After a few seconds, she nodded to herself. I was right. Okafor crossed his arms. About what? She didn't look at him. You've got a small leak in your fuel line. Not enough to stop fuel flow completely, but enough to let air in. She tapped lightly on a section near the hose. That's why it started rough before dying. The engine couldn't maintain proper combustion. Okafor frowned. The explanation was simple, too simple, and yet it made sense. Still skepticism lingered. And you figured all that out just by looking? He asked. This time, she glanced at him. A brief look, calm, measured. Then she said, I didn't just look. Before he could respond, she reached into the engine more firmly, now adjusting the line carefully. Her movements were precise, not rushed, not clumsy. She removed a small section, inspected it, then used what looked like a piece of cloth from her own clothing to tighten and reinforce the connection. It wasn't sophisticated, it wasn't high-tech, but it was deliberate, effective. Okafor found himself stepping closer without realizing it, watching, studying. Something about the way she worked felt familiar, not to him personally, but to something he had seen before. The same quiet confidence his top engineers had when they were certain of a solution. The same focus, the same control, except she had no tools, no equipment, no support, just instinct and experience. Try it, she said, stepping back slightly. Okafor hesitated. He looked at the engine, then at her. You're sure? She shrugged lightly. If it doesn't start, then it wasn't the problem. That answer caught him off guard. No defensiveness, no overconfidence, just logic, simple and grounded. He nodded slowly and walked around to the driver's seat. As he opened the door, he felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest, anticipation. Not the kind he felt during business deals or high-stakes negotiations. This was different, smaller, sharper. He got in and placed his hands on the wheel. For a brief moment he just sat there. Then he turned the key. The engine responded instantly. No struggle, no hesitation, no uneven vibration, just a smooth, steady ignition. Alive. Okafor's eyes widened slightly. He pressed the accelerator gently. The response was clean, controlled, perfect. He turned off the engine and stepped out of the car slowly. For a second, he didn't speak, didn't move. He just looked at her. Really looked this time. Not at the clothes, not at the dust, not at the surface, but at the person standing in front of him. How? He finally asked. It wasn't a challenge, it wasn't disbelief. It was genuine. She wiped her hands lightly against her dress as if the result had been expected all along. My father, she said. Okafor tilted his head slightly. What about him? He was a mechanic, she replied. One of the best in Enugu. There was something in her voice when she said it. Not pride, not sadness, something quieter, something deeper. He could fix anything. She continued. Cars, generators, engines, anything that had a problem, he understood it. Okafor listened, and for some reason he believed her. He taught you, he asked. She nodded. Everything he knew. There was no exaggeration in her tone, no attempt to impress, just truth. Silence settled between them for a moment, but it wasn't awkward. It was thoughtful. Okafor glanced back to his car, then at her again. You fixed it in minutes, he said quietly. She shrugged. It wasn't a big problem. That statement hit him harder than it should have, because in that moment his mind flashed back to his lab, to his engineers, to his failing engine, to years of effort and no solution. It wasn't a big problem. The contrast was almost painful. What's your name? He asked. She hesitated briefly, as if deciding whether it mattered. Chioma. The name settled in the air between them. Okafor repeated it softly. Chioma. Fit her. Simple, strong. Uncomplicated. Another pause. Then he said something that surprised even him. Come with me. Chioma frowned slightly. Would I want to show you something? Her eyes narrowed just a little. Suspicion, caution. Understandable. You don't even know me, she said. Okafor gave a faint, almost tired smile. I know you just fixed a problem I couldn't. That wasn't entirely true, but it was enough. She studied him for a moment, trying to read him to understand what he wanted. Why, she asked. It was a fair question, and once Okafor didn't have a perfect answer. He looked at her, then back at the car, then at the quiet road around them, and finally he said, because I think you can help me fix something much bigger. Chioma didn't respond immediately. The night air moved softly around them, carrying distant sounds from the roadside. Voices, laughter, life continuing as it always had. But in that moment, something had shifted. Two completely different worlds had just collided. A billionaire who couldn't fix his own creation, and a homeless girl who saw problems others missed. She looked at him again, longer this time, more carefully, and somewhere in that silence a decision began to form, not fully spoken, not fully understood, but real. Because deep down even she could feel it. This moment was not ordinary, and whatever came next would change everything. Chioma didn't answer immediately. She stood there a few steps away from the car, her eyes fixed on Okafor. Not with awe, not with excitement, but with careful consideration. The night air moved gently around them, carrying the distant hum of life from nearby stalls and passing vehicles. People like her didn't say yes quickly, not to strangers, not to offers that sounded too sudden, not to men who arrived in expensive cars and spoke in calm, controlled voices. She had learned that lesson the hard way. What exactly do you want me to do? She asked finally. Okafor leaned lightly against the side of his car, studying her, just as carefully. I want you to look at something, he said. That's all. That's never all, she replied. There was no attitude in her voice, just truth. Okafor let out a quiet breath, almost amused. You're right, he admitted. It's not all. Chioma folded her arms slightly, waiting. He continued more honestly now. I've been working on something for years, something important, and it's not working. Chioma's expression didn't change much, but her eyes sharpened just a little. And you think I can fix it? She asked. I think, Okafor said slowly. You see things differently. That made her pause. Not because she believed him, but because he sounded like he believed it. Chioma glanced around the road. Everything here was familiar, predictable, safe in its own rough way. A roadside stall owner arguing over change, a group of young boys laughing too loudly, a woman packing up goods for the night. This was her world, simple, hard, unforgiving but known, and then there was this man, clean, composed, out of place, offering something unclear, something uncertain. You're not afraid I'll steal from you? She asked suddenly. Okafor blinked, then shook his head. No. Why not? Because you didn't take anything from my car, he said simply. And you could have. Chioma held his gaze for a second, longer, testing him, weighing him. Then she exhaled quietly. You don't look like someone who trusts easily. I don't, Okafor replied. Then why now? He didn't hesitate this time. Because I don't have the luxury not to. That answer settled something. Not completely, but enough. Chioma uncrossed her arms. Fine, she said. I'll come. Okafor nodded once. No celebration, no overreaction. Just quiet acknowledgement. Get in, he said, gesturing to the passenger side. She hesitated briefly before opening the door. As she sat down, she ran her hand lightly over the seat, as if confirming it was real. Not because she had never seen a car like this before, but because she had never been inside one like this. Okafor walked around to the driver's side and got in. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he started the engine. This time it came to life smoothly. They pulled back onto the road. The drive was quiet at first. Chioma sat upright, her eyes moving slowly across the interior of the car. The dashboard, the stitching on the seats, the soft glow of the control panel. Everything was clean, ordered, different from the world. She knew. Okafor noticed, but said nothing. After a while, she spoke. "So what is this thing you want me to see?" "A jet engine," he replied. She turned, her head slightly. "A what?" "A jet engine," he repeated. "For aircraft." Her brows pulled together just a little. "That's big." "Yes, and you've been working on it for 3 years." She let that sit. 3 years. Then she asked the obvious question. "And it doesn't work?" Okafor's grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "No, not at all. It works," he said carefully. "Just not the way it should." Chioma nodded slowly. That was all she said. No judgment, no surprise, just a quiet acknowledgement. As they drove, the surroundings began to change again. The rough edges of the roadside faded. The streets widened. The lights became brighter. The buildings grew taller. Chioma watched it happen in silence. She had seen places like this before from a distance, but being inside it, that was different. By the time they reached the gates of Okafor's company headquarters, the contrast was impossible to ignore. Tall glass structures rose into the night sky. Security lights illuminated the compound. Guards stood at attention. The gates opened almost immediately as the car approached. Chioma straightened slightly. "They know you," she said. "Yes, you're important." Okafor glanced at her briefly. Something like that. The car rolled to a smooth stop in front of the main building. Before Chioma could reach for the door, a uniformed attendant stepped forward and opened it. For her. She froze for half a second, not out of fear, but unfamiliarity. Then she stepped out. Her eyes moved across everything. The polished floors visible through the glass entrance. The lighting, the structure. It didn't feel real. Felt like stepping into a different world. Okafor came around to meet her. "Come," he said. She followed. Inside, the air was cooler, quieter, controlled. Employees who were still around at that hour looked up as they walked in. And then they stared. Not at Okafor. Chioma. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't hidden. Their eyes moved over her clothes, her appearance, trying to understand what they were seeing. A homeless girl walking beside the CEO into the building. Chioma felt it. Every glance, every silent question. But she didn't shrink. She didn't lower her head. She just walked steady, calm, unaffected. Okafor noticed that too. And for a brief moment he respected it. They entered his office, large, minimal, expensive, without trying to show it. Chioma stepped in slowly, taking it all in. The space, the view, the quiet. She didn't touch anything, didn't move too far, just stood there. Okafor walked toward his desk and pressed a button. "Send someone in," he said. A moment later, his secretary entered. She stopped when she saw Chioma. Confusion flashed across her face, but she recovered quickly. "Yes, sir." "Get her food," Okafor said. The secretary hesitated, then nodded. "Right away, sir." She left. Chioma looked at him. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said. "Then why?" Okafor leaned slightly against his desk. "Because you're hungry." She didn't respond, but her silence confirmed it. When the food arrived, it came in neatly arranged trays. Rice, stew, meat, water. Chioma stared at it for a moment, then at Okafor. He nodded once. "Go ahead." That was all she needed. She sat down and began to eat, not slowly, not politely, but not wildly either, just honestly, like someone who had learned not to waste time when food was in front of them. Okafor watched quietly. No judgment, no discomfort, just observation. There was something grounding about the moment, real, unfiltered, different from the artificial environments he was used to. Midway through her meal, the door opened, abruptly. The head engineer stepped in. Sir, we need to. He stopped. His eyes landed on Chioma. Confusion again, then slight discomfort, but urgency pushed him forward. We ran another test, he said. Okafor's expression shifted instantly. And a pause it failed. The word hung in the air, heavy, familiar. Frustrating. Okafor's jaw tightened. His hand clenched slightly at his side. For a second, it looked like he might explode, but instead he exhaled. Slowly. Leave, he said. Sir. I said leave. The engineer hesitated, then nodded and walked out. Silence returned, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one was heavier charged. Chioma wiped her hands slowly, then looked at him. What exactly is wrong with it? She asked. Okafor let out a quiet, tired laugh. If I knew that we wouldn't be here. She studied him for a moment, then said something simple. Can I see it? Okafor paused. His eyes met hers. There was no arrogance in her tone, no assumption, just curiosity and something else, confidence. Not loud, not forced, but present. He thought about it for a moment. All the experts, all the failures, all the time lost. Then he nodded. All right, he said. He pushed himself off the desk. Come. As they walked toward the door, something shifted again. Not in the room, not in the building, but in the direction of everything. Because, without fully realizing it, Okafor had just made a decision that would change his life. And Chioma was walking straight into a world that had no idea what was coming. The walk from Okafor's office to the engineering wing felt longer than it actually was. Not because of the distance, but because of what it carried. Chioma walked a step behind him, her eyes quietly taking in everything around her. The floors beneath her feet were smooth and spotless, reflecting the overhead lights in a way that made every movement feel sharper, more deliberate. This place was nothing like the roadside she had come from. Everything here had structure, order, purpose. People passed by in pressed shirts and polished shoes, their conversations clipped and focused. Some greeted Okafor respectfully as they crossed paths. Good evening, sir. Sir. Evening, sir. He acknowledged them with brief nods, barely slowing down. But their eyes drifted toward Chioma. Confusion, curiosity, judgment, unspoken questions filled the air. Who is she? Why is she here? Why is she walking with him? Chioma felt it. Every glance, every silent assumption, but she didn't react, didn't shrink, didn't try to explain herself. She had spent too many years being looked at like she didn't belong. It didn't scare her anymore. Okafor pushed open a set of heavy glass doors, and the environment shifted instantly. The air changed, cooler, sharper. The faint smell of heated metal and machine oil lingered beneath the sterile scent of controlled ventilation. This was the heart of the operation, the mechanical workshop, the place where ideas were turned into reality, or in this case, where reality refused to cooperate. Inside, engineers moved around large workstations, their attention fixed on screens, tools, and complex components. Conversation overlapped in low tones, punctuated by the occasional clink of metal or hum of equipment. At the center of it all, the engine. Even Chioma slowed slightly when she saw it. It was massive, far larger than any car engine she had ever worked on. Layers of metal, precision parts, intricate systems woven together in a way that looked almost alive. It wasn't just a machine. It was a statement, a challenge, and right now a failure. The moment Okafor stepped in the room, shifted, conversation stopped, movement slowed, attention snapped toward him. Sir, one of the engineers said, straightening. Okafor didn't respond immediately. His eyes were already on the engine. Status, he said. The head engineer stepped forward. We ran another test cycle. He began carefully. Okafor's expression didn't change, and a brief hesitation. Same result. Silence, heavy, familiar. The words landed like a weight, pressing down on everyone in the room. Okafor's jaw tightened. How, he asked quietly. We adjusted the airflow distribution as planned. The engineer continued. We recalibrated the fuel injection timing. We even reinforced the thermal shielding in the combustion chamber. And it still failed, Okafor pressed. Yes, sir. Something in his tone shifted then. Not loud but dangerous. What exactly happened, Okafor asked. The engineer gestured toward the engine. It starts. Stable, he explained. Everything looks perfect in the first phase. But once it reaches peak load, it destabilizes. Okafor finished. Yes, sir. Pause. Then, like it's fighting itself. That phrase again. It echoed in Okafor's mind. Fighting itself. He turned sharply. That doesn't make sense. We know, sir. The engineer said quickly. But the data, I don't care about the data. Okafor snapped. The room went still, completely still. I care about results. He continued, his voice lower now, but far more intense. I've brought in experts from across the world. I've given you every resource you asked for. No one spoke. No one moved. And yet, he said slowly, we're standing here with nothing. Behind him, Chioma watched, quiet, observing. She didn't react to his anger, didn't flinch. She simply looked past him at the engine. One of the engineers finally noticed her. His brows furrowed, then another engineer followed his gaze, and another. Within seconds, the attention shifted from Okafor to Chioma. Confusion spread across their faces, then disbelief, then something closer to amusement. Sir, one of them said cautiously, who is she? Okafor didn't turn. That's not your concern. But the question had already been asked, and the answer, whatever it was, didn't match what they were seeing. A woman in worn clothes, standing in a high-level engineering facility. It didn't fit. Chioma stepped forward slightly. Her eyes were still on the engine. Can I see it? She asked. The room went quiet again. Then a laugh, sharp, dismissive. One of the engineers shook his head. See what exactly, he said. The engine, Chioma replied calmly. Another engineer smirked. And what are you going to do with it? There it was, the assumption, the dismissal, the certainty that she didn't belong. Chioma didn't react, didn't argue. She simply repeated, I want to look at it. The first engineer scoffed. With all due respect, he said, though there was very little respect in his tone. This is a highly complex system. We've had teams from Germany and Japan working on this. Another added, some of the best engineers in the world. And you think the first one, continued, glancing at her clothes, you can do something they couldn't. A few quiet chuckles followed. Not loud, but enough. Okafor finally turned. His eyes moved from the engineers to Chioma, then back again. Let her see it, he said. The room fell silent. The head engineer frowned slightly. Sir, that's an order. There was no room for argument. Not in his tone. Not in his posture. A pause. Then, all right, the head engineer said reluctantly. He stepped aside. Chioma walked forward. No hesitation. No hesitation at all. As if the room, the people, the tension, none of it mattered. All that existed now was the engine. Up close, it was even more imposing. The scale, the detail, the complexity. Every component had been designed with precision. Every connection intentional. Every part serving a purpose. But Chioma didn't look overwhelmed. She looked focused. Her eyes moved slowly across the structure, taking it in, not rushing, not guessing, understanding. She circled it once, then again. Her fingers brushed lightly against certain areas, not randomly but deliberately, as if she was listening through touch. The engineers watched her now. The amusement had faded slightly, replaced by curiosity. Then skepticism again. She doesn't even know what she's looking at. Someone muttered under their breath. Chioma ignored it. She stopped near one section of the engine, leaning slightly closer. Her eyes narrowed just a bit. Then she stepped back, tilted her head, looked again. Something had caught her attention. Something specific. Okafor noticed the shift. He stepped closer. "What is it?" he asked. Chioma didn't answer immediately. She moved a little to the side, looking at the engine from a different angle. Then she spoke. "You said it works at first, right?" The head engineer nodded. "Yes. And then it starts having problems when it reaches peak." "Yes." She nodded slowly, then pointed. "There." The engineers leaned in slightly, where one of them asked. She stepped closer and touched a section near the airflow system. "Right there." The head engineer frowned. "That area has been checked multiple times." Chioma glanced at him briefly, then back at the engine. "You checked it," she said, not a question. A statement. "Yes," he replied. "And you didn't find anything wrong, no?" She nodded again, then said quietly, "That's the problem." Silence. Confusion spread across their faces. "That doesn't make any sense." One engineer said. Chioma straightened. "It makes sense if you're looking at the wrong thing," she replied. Another scoffed. "And what exactly are we missing?" She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she placed her hand lightly against the structure again, closed her eyes for a brief second, then opened them and said, "It's not broken." The room went still. What the head engineer asked. "It's not broken," she repeated. "It's out of balance." The words landed differently, not dismissively, not vaguely, but precisely. And for the first time since she walked into the room, no one laughed, because something in the way she said it didn't sound like a guess. It sounded like the beginning of an answer. Okafor's gaze sharpened. "Explain," he said. Chioma looked at the engine again, then back at him, and in that moment the air in the room shifted. Because whether they believed her or not, something was about to change. The air inside the workshop had changed, not loudly, not visibly, but something had shifted the moment Chioma said those words. "It's not broken. It's out of balance." For a few seconds, no one spoke, not because they agreed, but because they didn't immediately know how to dismiss her. Then a low chuckle broke the silence. One of the engineers shook his head, folding his arms. "Out of balance," he repeated, amused. "That's not how this works." Another joined in, a faint smirk forming. "This isn't a generator or a roadside engine," he added. "You can't just balance it and expect everything to fall into place." A few quiet laughs followed, not loud enough to sound outright disrespectful, but clear enough to say, "You don't belong here." Chioma didn't react, not to the laughter, not to the tone. She simply looked back at the engine. Her eyes moved slowly across its structure again, as if the noise behind her didn't exist. That unsettled them more than anything else, because most people in her position would have reacted, defended themselves, argued, proven something, but she didn't. She just focused. Okafor noticed, and for reasons he couldn't fully explain, he didn't interrupt her. Instead, he turned his attention back to the engineers. "Explain why she's wrong," he said. The head engineer straightened slightly, caught off guard by the request. "Sir, you heard me," Okafor replied. "Explain it." The room grew quieter again. The head engineer cleared his throat. "With respect, sir, the issue isn't balance. We've already analyzed airflow distribution, pressure ratios, and structural alignment." And Okafor pressed. "And everything checks out within acceptable parameters." Okafor's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then why does it fail?" Pause. The engineer hesitated. "We are still investigating that." That answer lingered heavy, uncomfortable, because it wasn't really an answer. Okafor turned back toward Chioma. She had moved closer to the engine again. Her hand rested lightly against one section, her fingers tracing along the metal as if following a pattern invisible to pattern. Everyone else. Chioma, he said. She didn't look at him. Yes, tell me what you see. The room stilled again, all eyes on her waiting, expecting something vague, something easily dismissible. But Chioma didn't rush. She took a slow breath, then spoke. You built this to push power forward, she said. The head engineer frowned slightly. Of course, he replied. That's what it's designed to do. She nodded. But it's not just pushing forward, she continued. It's pushing against itself. A few of the engineers exchanged looks, confusion, skepticism. That doesn't make sense, one of them said. Chioma turned slightly, finally facing them. It doesn't make sense because you're only looking at one side of it. What other side is there? Another engineer asked. She gestured toward the engine. Everything inside this machine is trying to move at the same time. Fuel, heat, pressure, but they're not listening to each other. The head engineer frowned deeper. They're not supposed to listen, he said. They're controlled systems. Chioma tilted her head slightly. And yet they're still fighting. Silence again. There's that word. Fighting. It was familiar. Too familiar. They had used it themselves. You said it stabilizes at first. Chioma continued. Yes. The head engineer admitted. And then when it reaches peak, she said softly, everything starts to break. Yes. She nodded slowly. That means it's not a design failure. Pause. It's a timing problem. That landed differently. Even the skeptical ones felt it. Timing. Not structure. Not materials. Not design. Timing. One of the engineers stepped forward. That's not possible, he said. All timing systems have been calibrated precisely. Chioma looked at him. Precisely based on what? Based on the model, he replied. She held his gaze. And the model is perfect, he hesitated. It's been tested. That's not what I asked, she said calmly. The room went quiet again, because suddenly the question didn't feel simple anymore. Okafor stepped closer. What are you saying? He asked. Chioma turned back to the engine. I'm saying, she began slowly, you built something powerful. She placed her hand against the metal again. Too powerful. The frowned. That's the point, one of them said. She shook her head slightly. No, she replied. Power is not the point. A pause. Control is. Those words hung in the air, heavier than anything she had said before. You've made every part strong, she continued. Efficient. Fast. But you didn't make them wait for each other. The head engineer stepped forward again. They don't need to wait, he insisted. They're synchronized. Chioma looked at him quietly. Then why does it only fail when everything is running at full strength? No one answered. Because that question cut through everything. All the data, all the analysis, all the assumptions. Chioma stepped closer to a specific section again. This part, she said, pointing. It's pushing air too aggressively. That's within acceptable limits. The engineer responded quickly. For the start, she said. Then she pointed to another section. And this is injecting fuel based on that same assumption. She moved her hand slightly. But when everything heats up, the timing changes. The engineers watched her now. Not laughing. Not dismissing. Listening. Even if they didn't fully understand yet. It's not failing because it's weak, Chioma continued. It's failing because it's not coordinated. A long silence followed. Then a quiet scoff from the back. So what one engineer said. You're saying we should just slow it down. Chioma didn't even look at him. I'm saying, she replied. You need to let it breathe. That earned another round of confused looks. Breathe, someone repeated. She nodded. Yes. The head engineer sighed slightly. With all due respect, this isn't. Run it, Chioma said. That stopped him. What? Run the engine, she repeated. The room shifted again, tension rising. We've already run it, the engineer said. Run it again, she replied. For what purpose? She finally looked directly at him. So I can show you. A pause, a long one. No, one of the engineers said firmly. We're not risking another cycle based on. Do it. Okafor's voice cut through the room, cold, final. All eyes turned to him. The authority in his tone left no room for debate. The head engineer hesitated. Sir, with respect, we've already gathered all the necessary. I said run it. Silence. Then yes, sir. The room moved reluctantly but quickly because when Okafor gave an order, it was followed. Systems powered on, lights flickered. The engine began its low awakening hum once again. Chioma stood still, watching, listening, feeling. The engineers monitored their screens. Data streamed in. Everything looked normal, stable, just like before. Okafor glanced at her. She hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. Her eyes were fixed on the engine. The hum grew louder, stronger, the machine building toward its peak. Then a slight shift, subtle but there. Chioma stepped forward. Stop. No one reacted immediately. Stop it now, she said again. The head engineer hesitated. Sir, shut it down, Okafor ordered. The system powered down. The engine slowed, then silence returned. Chioma stepped closer, pointing. There, she said. The engineers rushed to check, scanning, reviewing, analyzing, and then one of them froze. Wait. Another leaned in. No. The head engineer stepped closer. His eyes widened slightly, because for the first time they saw it, not a failure, not damage, but something they had overlooked, a misalignment, not in structure, but in timing. A small one, almost invisible, but enough to cause everything else to collapse under pressure. The room fell silent, completely silent, and slowly, very slowly, the laughter from earlier faded into something else, something heavier, something humbling. Because the homeless girl had just seen what they couldn't. For a moment, no one spoke, not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. The discovery sat in the air like something fragile, something that could shatter if anyone rushed to touch it. Screens still glowed with frozen data. The engine, now silent, seemed to loom larger than before, as if it too was waiting. The head engineer leaned closer to the monitor, his eyes scanning rapidly. Run that back, he said. Another engineer replayed the last few seconds of the data capture. Lines moved. Numbers shifted. Graphs dipped and rose. And there it was again. Subtle, almost invisible, but undeniable. A slight delay. A misalignment in timing between airflow and fuel injection, so small it had been buried under everything else. The head engineer's lips parted slightly. How did we miss that? No one answered, because the answer stood just a few feet away. Chioma. She hadn't moved. She stood quietly near the engine, her posture relaxed, her expression unchanged. It was as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. But the room saw her differently now. No laughter, no smirks, only silence, and something else. Respect. Not loud, not spoken. But there. Okafor stepped forward slowly, his gaze fixed on the monitor. That's it, he said under his breath. The head engineer looked at him. Sir, it's small, extremely small. Okafor nodded. and yet it shuts everything down. Pause. Then he turned to Chioma. You saw that? Just by looking, Chioma shrugged lightly. It wasn't hidden, she said. That answer hit the room in a strange way, because to them it had been hidden, buried under complexity, masked by data, lost in layers of analysis. But to her it had been obvious. The head engineer straightened. If this is correct, he said carefully, then the issue isn't structural. It's synchronization. Chioma nodded. Yes. And that means, he continued slowly, we've been trying to fix the wrong problem. No one said it out loud, but they were all thinking the same thing. 3 years. One of the engineers spoke up. So what do we do? He asked. Looking between Okafor and Chioma, the question lingered, because now the answer mattered. Okafor didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at Chioma. Can you fix it? The room held its breath. Chioma glanced at the engine, then back at him. I can try, she said. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't uncertainty. It was honesty. That was enough. Do it, Okafor said. A ripple of tension moved through the room. The head engineer hesitated. Sir, we should run a full recalibration sequence first, he suggested. Adjusting timing at this level without simulation could do it. Okafor repeated. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried finality. The engineer exhaled slowly. All right. He stepped back, giving space, something he hadn't expected to do, not for someone like her. But things had changed. Chioma stepped closer to the engine. This time the room didn't question her, didn't interrupt, didn't laugh. They watched carefully. Up close, the machine was still imposing, complex, precise, but Chioma didn't treat it like something untouchable. She treated it like a problem she intended to understand. She reached toward the section she had pointed out earlier. Her fingers moved slowly, tracing connections, following the flow of components. Her eyes narrowed slightly, thinking, calculating, not in numbers, but in feel, in rhythm, in instinct. She spoke quietly. This part is reacting too fast, she said. The head engineer stepped closer, cautious but attentive. Now, it's designed to respond instantly, he replied. Chioma shook her head. Not instantly, she said. It needs a delay. A delay, another engineer asked. That will reduce efficiency, someone added. Chioma didn't look at them. It will stop it from breaking, she said simply. Silence. She adjusted her position slightly, then reached in carefully, not aggressively, not randomly. Every movement had intention. She loosened a sandovlish.com. Connection slightly adjusted. A valve shifted the alignment of a small component, barely noticeable unless you knew what you were looking for. The engineers leaned in, watching closely, trying to follow what she was doing. Some of them started murmuring quietly. She's reducing the response rate, but that affects the pressure curve. No, wait. Look at how it redistributes. Chioma paused, then adjusted one more point, a small one, but precise. She stepped back. That's it, she said. The room went still again. The head engineer frowned slightly. That's all, he asked. Chioma nodded. Yes. A long pause followed, because no one wanted to say it. No one wanted to be the one to question it, but the doubt was still there, lingering. One of the engineers finally spoke. With respect, it can't be that. It's not simple, she said. You just made it simple. That shut him up. Okafor stepped forward. Run it, he said. The head engineer hesitated again, but less this time. Sir, if this fails, it could damage the system. Okafor didn't blink. Run it. The tension in the room tightened. This wasn't just another test. This was different, because this time they didn't know what to expect. The engineers moved into position. Systems powered on. Lights flickered. The engine began its low familiar hum. Chioma stood still, watching, listening. The initial phase was smooth as always, stable, controlled. The head engineer monitored the data. All readings normal, he said. Okafor's eyes didn't leave the engine. The hum grew louder, stronger, building, approaching peak threshold. Another engineer announced. This was where it usually failed, where everything broke, where the imbalance took over. The room held its breath. The engine pushed forward. 1 second. 2. 3. No. Instability. The head engineer's eyes widened slightly. Pressure stable. Another voice. Combustion steady. The engine roared. But not violently. Not chaotically. Smooth, controlled. Powerful. Maintain it. Okafor said quietly. They did. 5 seconds. 10. Still stable. No fluctuations. No warnings. No red lights. The room fell into stunned silence. Because for the first time in 3 years, the engine wasn't fighting itself. It was working perfectly. The head engineer stepped back slightly, disbelief written across his face. This, he whispered, this is not possible. But it was. The data confirmed it. The machine confirmed it. Reality confirmed it. One of the engineers let out a quiet laugh. Not mocking, not dismissive, just overwhelmed. Okafor slowly turned his head toward Chioma. She stood exactly where she had been. Calm, unshaken, as if this outcome had never been in doubt. How did you know? He asked quietly. Chioma looked at the engine, then back at him, and said, it just needed to breathe. Silence. Then applause. Not loud at first. Just a few hands. Then more. Then the entire room. Not for the machine. Not for the company. But for her. The girl they had laughed at. The girl they had dismissed. The girl who had just done what none of them could. And in that moment, everything changed. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the story had already begun to spread. Not slowly, not quietly, but like something that had been waiting to explode. It started inside the company. One engineer told another. A technician mentioned it in passing. Someone shared a short clip, just a few seconds of the engine running smoothly during the final test. First, it was just internal chatter. Did you hear what happened last night? They fixed it. No, not they. Then who? A girl. What girl? Confusion turned into curiosity. Curiosity turned into disbelief. And disbelief turned into fascination. By mid-morning, the story had leaked. No one could say exactly how. Maybe it was an excited junior engineer. Maybe a security staff member. Maybe someone who simply couldn't hold in what they had witnessed. But once it got out, it didn't stop. News outlets picked it up first. Breakthrough at Okafor Industries. Then came the twist. Mystery woman solves engine problem. Global experts couldn't fix. That was all it took. Within hours, reporters had gathered outside the company gates. Cameras, microphones, live broadcast. The kind of attention Okafor was used to, but not like this. Not for this reason. Inside the building, the atmosphere had completely shifted. Employees who had ignored Chioma the night before now whispered her name in passing. That's her. The one from yesterday. Yes, she fixed it. They said, she did. She doesn't even have a degree. Chioma heard the whispers. Of course she did. But she didn't react, didn't respond, didn't try to correct or explain anything. She simply walked calm, steady, as if nothing had changed, but everything had. She was no longer invisible. Okafor stood in his office looking out through the glass walls at the growing crowd outside. His phone buzzed nonstop. Calls from investors, messages from media houses, emails from international partners. Everyone wanted the same thing: information, access, answers, but Okafor wasn't looking at his phone. He was thinking 3 years. 3 years of effort, money, and frustration solved in one night, not by a team of experts. Not by advanced simulations, but by a girl no one had noticed. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he said. His secretary stepped in. "Sir, the media is requesting a statement." Okafor turned slightly. "And they're asking about the engine and about her." Pause. "They want to meet her." Okafor glanced toward the door, then back at the city beyond the glass. "They will," he said. Moments later, Chioma was brought into his office. She looked the same, simple, unchanged, but the room responded to her differently now. Even the air felt different. She stood near the entrance. "You called me," she said. Okafor nodded. "Yes." He gestured toward a chair. "Sit." She hesitated briefly, then did, still not fully comfortable in this world, but no longer intimidated by it. "They want to see you," Okafor said. "Who, the media?" Chioma frowned slightly. "Why?" Okafor almost smiled. "Because you did something no one else could." She looked down for a moment, then back at him. "I just fixed it." That simplicity again. That refusal to make it bigger than it was. And yet it was bigger. "They won't see it that way," Okafor said. "They'll ask questions, that they'll want your story, that they'll want to know who you are." Chioma's expression tightened slightly. "I don't have a story," she said quietly. Okafor leaned forward slightly. "Everyone has a story." Pause. She didn't argue, but she didn't agree either. Okafor sat back. "You don't have to say much," he added. "Just answer what you're comfortable with." Chioma looked at him carefully. "You trust me to do that?" she asked. He didn't hesitate. "Yes." That word settled something. Not fully, but enough. Minutes later, they stepped out together. The moment they entered the main lobby, the energy shifted instantly. Cameras turned, voices rose, microphones lifted. "That's her. Over here. Miss. Miss." Chioma froze for a split second. Not out of fear, but because of the suddenness, the intensity, the attention. Okafor stepped slightly ahead. "Calm down," he said firmly. His voice cut through the noise just enough. "Everyone will get their chance." The crowd settled slightly, but the cameras didn't stop. The flashes didn't stop. The attention didn't stop. Chioma stood beside him, still, grounded, but now fully seen. "Sir," one reporter called out, "is it true that this woman fixed the engine?" Okafor didn't look away. "Yes." Another voice. "Who is she?" Pause. Then Okafor turned slightly toward Chioma. His answer came clearly. "She's part of this company now." A ripple moved through the crowd. Shock, interest, more questions. "But she has no engineering background. She has no formal qualifications. How is that possible?" Okafor raised his hand slightly. Silence fell again. "Degrees don't solve problems," he said. "Understanding does." That line hit hard because it wasn't just a statement. It was a challenge to everyone watching, to everyone listening. A reporter turned to Chioma. "Can you tell us how you did it?" All eyes shifted to her. Chioma took a small breath, then spoke. "It wasn't working because it wasn't balanced," she said. Simple, direct, no extra words. Another question. "Did you study engineering?" She shook her head. "No." "Then how did you learn?" She paused, then said, "My father." Silence. Not awkward, but heavy, because there was more in that answer than she said, more than they could see. The questions continued, but Chioma didn't change. She didn't perform, didn't exaggerate, didn't try to impress. She answered simply, honestly. and somehow that made it more powerful. By the time the session ended, one thing was clear. The world wasn't just interested in the engine anymore. They were interested in her. Inside the building, as the doors closed behind them, the noise faded. The impact remained. Okafor walked beside her in silence for a moment, then said, "You handled that well." Chioma shrugged slightly. "I just answered." He glanced at her, and for the first time there was something new in his expression. Not curiosity, not admiration, something deeper: recognition. Because he wasn't just looking at a girl who fixed his engine anymore. He was looking at someone rare, someone who didn't need validation to be valuable, someone who didn't try to be seen but couldn't be ignored. And deep down he knew this was only the beginning. Because once the world starts paying attention, it doesn't stop. And Chioma, whether she wanted it or not, had just stepped into something much bigger than herself. The house didn't feel real at first. Chioma stood just inside the doorway, her hand resting lightly against the frame, as if she needed something solid to confirm she wasn't dreaming. The space in front of her stretched wide. Clean walls, polished floors, soft lighting that didn't flicker or struggle. It was quiet. Not the kind of quiet she was used to, the lonely, uncertain kind that came with sleeping in open places or abandoned corners. This was different. This was safe. Behind her, the agent cleared his throat politely. "Madam, would you like me to show you around, madam?" The word landed strangely. Chioma didn't turn immediately. She took one slow step forward, then another. Her feet made soft sounds against the floor. No dust and no gravel, and no uneven ground, just smooth, steady surface. "I can look," she said quietly. The agent nodded. Of course. The living room opened up around her like something from a different world. Large windows, soft furniture dotted a table that looked too clean to touch. She moved slowly, her fingers brushing lightly against the back of a chair. It didn't wobble, didn't creak, didn't feel like it would give way under pressure. Everything here was certain, reliable. She swallowed lightly. "Everything here is yours," the agent said gently. Chioma paused. "Yours." She repeated it in her mind. It didn't settle easily because nothing like this had ever belonged to her before, not even close. She moved toward the window. Outside, the compound was calm, secured, organized. No noise, no chaos, no sudden danger. She stared for a moment, then quietly asked why. The agent blinked. "Madam." She turned slightly. "Why did he give me this?" The agent hesitated because that wasn't a question he could answer with paperwork or rehearsed lines. "I believe," he began carefully, "Mr. Okafor values what you've done." Chioma looked at him. "That's all." The agent offered a small, uncertain smile. "I think it's more than that." Chioma didn't respond because she didn't fully understand it yet. Not the house, not the car parked outside, not the sudden shift in how the world treated her. It had all happened too fast. One moment, she was fixing a broken car on the roadside. The next, she was standing inside a house that looked like something she would have once walked past without stopping. Later that evening, Okafor arrived. He didn't come with a crowd, no security parade, and no noise, just him. He stepped inside quietly, his eyes scanning the room before settling on her. "You've seen it?" he asked. Chioma nodded. "Yes." Pause. "It's too much," she said. Okafor leaned slightly against the wall, his expression calm. "No," he said, "it's not." She frowned. "It is." Compared to what he asked. That question stopped her because the answer was obvious compared to everything she had known, everything she had lived, everything she had survived. "I don't need this much," she said. Okafor studied her. "That's not the point." "Then what is he?" Took a step forward. "The point is," he said, "you deserve better than what you had." Chioma held his gaze. There was no pity in his voice, no sympathy, just certainty. She looked around the house again, then back at him. "And if I don't know what to do with it?" she asked. Okafor's expression softened slightly. "Then you learn." That answer sat with her not as pressure, not as expectation, but as possibility. The next day she returned to the company. But this time it was different. The moment she stepped through the entrance, the attention returned. Not confused this time, not dismissive, but aware. People greeted her, some hesitantly, some respectfully, some with curiosity they couldn't hide. "Good morning." "Morning, Chioma." Hearing her name in that space still felt strange, but she acknowledged them simply without trying to become something she wasn't. In the workshop, the shift was even clearer. The same engineers who had laughed days before now stood straighter when she walked in. The head engineer approached her first. "Good morning," he said. Chioma nodded. "Morning." He hesitated briefly. Then, "About yesterday, I owe you an apology." That caught her off guard. Not because she expected one, but because she didn't. "We underestimated you," he continued. "That was our mistake." Chioma looked at him, then shrugged lightly. "You didn't know me," she said. That answer disarmed him more than any confrontation would have, because there was no bitterness in it. No need to hold on to the past, just acceptance. Work resumed, but now it included her. First it was small. Observations, questions, suggestions, but each time she spoke, the room listened because now they knew. Now they had seen. Chioma didn't try to prove herself, didn't try to dominate conversations. She simply worked the way her father had taught her, quietly, carefully, with attention to what others overlooked. And slowly, respect grew. Not forced, not demanded, earned. One afternoon, as she stood near one of the workstations, an engineer approached her. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She nodded. "How do you see these things?" he asked. Chioma tilted her head slightly. "See what?" "The problems," he said. "The details. The things we miss." She thought for a moment, then said, "I listen." The engineer frowned slightly. "To what?" She gestured. "Toward the machine. To it." He blinked, confused. She smiled faintly. "Everything that doesn't work tells you why," she said. "You just have to pay attention." That stayed with him long after she walked away. Weeks passed, then months. Chioma's life changed in ways she was still learning to understand. She learned how to navigate meetings, how to sit in spaces that once felt unreachable, how to exist in a world that now made room for her. But through all of it, she didn't change who she was. The house became home not because of its size, but because of the quiet it offered, the chance to rest without fear. The car became a tool, not a symbol, just a way to move. And the company became something more than a workplace. It became a place where she belonged. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the city, Chioma stood by the large window in her living room. The light reflected softly against the glass. She looked out, not at the buildings, not at the cars, but at the space between everything. Her mind drifted back to the roadside, back to her father, back to the days when survival was the only plan. Then forward to now, to everything that had changed. She exhaled slowly, not overwhelmed, not confused, just aware. A soft knock came at the door. She turned and already knew who it was. When she opened it, Okafor stood there, same calm presence, same steady gaze. "You're getting used to it," he said. Chioma leaned lightly against the door. "A little." He stepped inside, looking around briefly, then back at her. "You're doing well," he added. She shook her head slightly. "I'm just learning." Okafor smiled faintly. "That's what doing well looks like." A quiet moment passed, comfortable, unforced. Then Chioma asked, "Why did you really bring me here?" Okafor didn't answer immediately. He looked at her carefully, then said, "Because you saw something I couldn't." She held his gaze. That's not the only reason. A small pause then. No, he admitted. Another moment then she asked softly, "What's the other reason?" Okafor's expression shifted slightly, something more honest, more open. "I wanted to see what would happen," he said. Chioma raised an eyebrow, and he looked around the room then back at her. "I'm still finding out," and for the first time she smiled. Not out of politeness, not out of uncertainty, but because somewhere deep down she understood. This life wasn't given to her. It was opening, and she was just beginning to step into it. The first time Chioma stayed late, it wasn't planned. There was no announcement, no deliberate decision to remain behind after everyone else had packed up for the day. It just happened. One moment the workshop was full, voices, movement, the rhythm of work flowing from one station to another. The next it was quiet. Most of the engineers had left. Lights dimmed slightly across the facility, shifting into night mode. The constant hum of machinery softened, leaving behind a calmer, almost reflective atmosphere. Chioma stood near one of the workbenches studying a smaller component from the engine, something that had been bothering her earlier in the day. Not a major issue, but something slightly off. She turned it slowly in her hand, thinking, "You're still here." The voice came from behind her. Calm, familiar. She didn't turn immediately. "I didn't notice the time," she said. Okafor walked closer, his hands tucked casually into his pockets. He had removed his suit jacket, his sleeves slightly rolled up, less formal, less distant than usual. "Most people would have noticed," he said. Chioma shrugged lightly. "I'm not most people." He almost smiled. He stepped beside her, glancing at the component in her hand. "What's wrong with it?" he asked. Chioma tilted it slightly, examining it again. "Nothing big," she said. "It just doesn't feel right." Okafor raised an eyebrow. "Feel," she nodded. "It's supposed to move smoothly," she explained, "but it hesitates just a little." He watched her closely. "You can tell that just by holding it." She looked at him. "You can't." That answer lingered because for Okafor the answer was no. He couldn't. And for the first time that didn't frustrate him. Fascinated him. She set the component down and adjusted it slightly within its housing. "Try it now," she said. Okafor reached forward, turning the mechanism gently. It moved smoothly, effortlessly, no resistance. He glanced at her. "You fixed it in seconds." Chioma shrugged again. It wasn't broken. Silence settled between them, but not the uncomfortable kind. The kind that made space. They stood there for a moment side by side. Two people from completely different worlds now sharing the same quiet. "Do you always stay this late?" Okafor asked. Chioma shook her head. "No." "Then why?" "Today." She paused, thinking, then said, "I like it when it's quiet." Okafor nodded slowly. "I understand that." She looked at him. "You do." He leaned lightly against the workbench. "Yes," he said. "It's easier to think when everything else stops." Chioma studied him for a second. "You don't look like someone who gets a lot of quiet." That made him laugh. Softly. "Not often," he admitted. Pause. "Then why did you build it?" she asked suddenly. Okafor blinked. "The engine." She nodded. He exhaled slowly, looking past the machines, past the walls, as if the answer was somewhere further away. "Because I could," he said at first. Then he shook his head slightly. "No, that's not true." Chioma waited. "I built it because I wanted to change something." He continued, "Make it better, faster, more efficient." She tilted her head slightly. "And did you?" He let out a quiet breath. "Not yet." That honesty hung between them, unfiltered. Chioma nodded slowly. "You will," she said. Okafor glanced at her. "You sound very sure." She met his gaze. "You didn't stop," she replied. That answer hit differently because it wasn't about the engine. It was about him. He looked at her for a moment longer than necessary, then looked away. You don't talk much, he said. Chioma smiled faintly. I talk when there's something to say. He nodded. Fair. Another quiet moment passed. Then, have you eaten? He asked. She blinked, caught off guard. No. Come, he said, pushing himself off the workbench. She hesitated. Where food, he replied simply. She followed. The restaurant wasn't far, quiet, private, the kind of place where conversations didn't echo and attention didn't linger too long. Chioma sat across from him, her posture still slightly cautious, but less guarded than before. The menu sat, untouched, in front of her. You can order anything, Okafor said. She glanced at the menu, then back at him. I don't know what most of this is. He nodded. Then I'll choose. She didn't argue. When the food arrived, she ate more slowly this time, not like the first day, not rushed, not driven by hunger alone, but with awareness, with presence. Okafor watched her for a moment, then said, You've changed. Chioma looked up. How you're more comfortable, he said. She thought about that, then nodded slightly. I think I'm getting used to not worrying all the time. That statement carried weight, more than she intended. Okafor leaned back slightly. That's a good thing. She looked at him. Yes. Pause. Then, have you always been like this? She asked. Like what, Calm? She said. Even when things go wrong. Okafor smiled faintly. No. She raised an eyebrow. No, I learned, he said. Over time. How he thought for a moment, then said, by failing. Chioma held his gaze. You don't look like someone who fails. He let out a quiet breath. I didn't either, he said. Silence settled again, but this time felt deeper because something had shifted. The conversation wasn't just about work anymore. It wasn't just about the engine. It was about them, two people learning each other slowly, carefully, without forcing anything. After dinner, they stepped outside. The night air was cool, calm. They stood for a moment without speaking, then Okafor said, You know, most people would have tried to impress me by now. Chioma looked at him. I'm not most people. He smiled. I've noticed. She tilted her head slightly. And most people would have tried to impress me too. That caught him off guard. In what way? She shrugged lightly. With money, with things, with words. He nodded. Slowly. And I haven't. She met his eyes. No. Pause. Then she added, You just gave me space. That landed softly but deeply. Okafor looked at her. Really looked at her. And for the first time he felt something unfamiliar. Not curiosity. Not admiration. Something quieter. Stronger connection. Chioma, he said. She looked at him. Yes. He hesitated, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he did. Then he said, You changed everything. She didn't respond immediately. She just watched him. Then slowly she smiled. You just needed to look in the right place. And in that moment something unspoken settled between them. Not loud, not dramatic, but real, because somewhere between broken engines and quiet conversations, between late nights and shared silence, something more had begun. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment where everything shifted and suddenly became something else. No dramatic confession that led to no sudden realization that changed everything overnight. Instead, it grew quietly. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and somewhere in between, spending time together stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like something natural. It was in the small things, the way Chioma would walk into the workshop and instinctively look for Okafor without even realizing she was doing it. The way he would pause mid-conversation with his executives when she entered, his attention shifting just slightly, almost unconsciously. The way their conversations stretched longer than necessary from work to ideas to stories they never planned to share. It was subtle but undeniable. One evening, long after the others had left, they found themselves back in the workshop again. Not because something was broken, not because something needed fixing, but because that had somehow become their place. Chioma stood near the large engine, the one that had brought them together. Her fingers brushed lightly against its surface. "It sounds different now," she said. Okafor leaned against a nearby table watching her. "How?" She tilted her head slightly. "Calmer," she said. He smiled faintly. "Machines don't have moods." She looked at him. "Neither do people until they do." That made him pause, because there was more meaning in that sentence than she said out loud. He pushed himself off the table and walked closer. "You've changed this place," he said. Chioma shook her head. "No," she replied. "You just see it differently now." That again, that way she had of turning things around, of making him question his own perspective without ever sounding like she was correcting him. "Do you ever think about leaving?" he asked suddenly. Chioma frowned. Slightly. "Leaving where?" "This," he said, gesturing around them. "The company, the city, all of it." She considered the question. Not quickly, not lightly. Then she said no. Okafor raised an eyebrow. "No." She looked at him. "I spent too much time surviving to walk away from something I'm building." That answer settled deep in him because it wasn't about comfort. It wasn't about convenience. It was about intention. "And you?" she asked. He hesitated then. "Said I've built my whole life around not stopping." Chioma studied him. "And are you tired?" The question was simple, but it landed harder than anything else. Okafor didn't answer immediately because for the first time he didn't have a quick response. "Sometimes," he admitted. She nodded. "Then maybe you don't need to stop," she said. "Maybe you just need something worth slowing down for." That stayed with him long after the conversation ended, long after they left the workshop, long after the night grew quiet, because deep down he knew what she meant, and he knew who she meant. The realization didn't come with panic or confusion or resistance. It came with clarity. The next few days he watched her differently. Not like a man trying to figure something out, but like someone who already knew the answer and was deciding what to do with it. The way she laughed, rare but genuine. The way she focused, completely without distraction. The way she spoke only when it mattered. There was no performance in her, no need to impress, no need to prove. And for a man who had spent his life surrounded by people trying to be something that felt rare. One evening he stood alone in his office, looking out at the city again. The same view, the same lights, the same world that once felt complete, but now felt different because something was missing, or rather something had been missing, and now he knew what it was. He picked up his phone, then paused. This wasn't a business decision, not a calculated move, not something he could approach with strategy. This was personal, and for the first time in a long time that made him uncertain but not afraid. He set the phone down, and instead he went to her. Chioma was at home when he arrived. The door opened before he knocked a second time. She looked at him, slightly surprised. "You didn't call," she said. "I know," he replied. A pause. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Yes." "Then why are you here?" He hesitated just for a second, then said, "Because I wanted to see you." That answer, it changed the air between them. Not dramatically, not loudly, but enough. She stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, the house felt warmer than usual, or maybe it was just the moment. They sat not across from each other this time, but closer. No rush, no pressure, just presence. "Chioma," he said after a while. She looked at him. "Yes." He exhaled slowly, not to steady himself, but to choose his words carefully. "I've built a lot of things in my life," he began. Companies, systems, opportunities. She listened. And I've always known what I was doing, he continued. Even when things were difficult, I understood the direction. A pause. But this, he said, looking at her, this is different. Chioma didn't interrupt. Because I didn't plan it, he added. I didn't expect it. His voice softened slightly. But I don't want to ignore it either. Silence. Then, say it, Chioma said softly. And just like that, the distance between uncertainty and truth disappeared. Okafor held her gaze. No hesitation now. I love you. The words were simple, clear, uncomplicated. Chioma didn't react immediately, not because she didn't feel it, but because she needed to understand it. Not the words, but what they meant. She looked at him carefully, deeply. You're sure? She asked. Yes. No confusion, no. No doubt, no. That was enough. Because Chioma wasn't someone who needed grand gestures or dramatic promises. She needed truth, and she could see it right there. So she smiled. Not wide, not overwhelming, but real. I love you too, she said. And just like that, everything aligned. No noise. No audience. No spectacle. Just two people choosing each other. The proposal came later, not long after. No cameras, no media, no crowd. Just him and her. A quiet evening. A simple moment. Chioma, he said, holding a small box. She looked at him, already knowing. Will you marry me? Tears filled her eyes. Not from surprise, not from disbelief, but from something deeper. A journey, a life, a moment she never imagined. Now real. Yes, she said. And somewhere, between broken engines and unexpected paths, between survival and something more, they had found each other. A love no one planned, a love no one expected, but a love that made perfect sense. The wedding didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning that had been waiting for them all along. It was simple. Not small, but simple. No excessive noise and no unnecessary display. Just intention. The venue was open, filled with soft light and quiet. Elegance. People gathered not just because of who Okafor was, but because of what the moment represented. A story no one expected. A journey no one could have planned. Guests whispered as they arrived. That's her. The one who fixed the engine, I heard she used to. But the whispers didn't last long. Because when Chioma walked in, everything else faded. She didn't look like someone trying to prove anything. She didn't walk like someone overwhelmed by attention. She walked like someone who understood exactly where she was and why. Her dress wasn't overly complicated, but it was beautiful, elegant, clean, and for the first time it didn't feel like something she had borrowed from a world that wasn't hers. Felt like it belonged to her. Okafor stood at the front waiting. Not distracted, not restless, just present. When his eyes met hers, the room disappeared. Because this wasn't about status or wealth or attention. It was about choice. Two people from completely different paths standing in the same place because they chose to be. The ceremony was quiet, focused. Every word carried weight. When it was time for vows, there were no rehearsed speeches, no long dramatic promises. Okafor spoke first. I've spent my life building things, he said, trying to make everything stronger, faster, better. His voice was steady but real. But you taught me something I didn't know I was missing. Chioma watched him, listening. You taught me that not everything needs to be forced. He continued. Some things just need to be understood. A small pause. And I understand this, he said. I understand you. He held her gaze. And I choose you. Silence, but not empty. Full. Chioma took a breath. I didn't plan this life, she said. I didn't expect it. Her voice was calm but deep. But I know what it feels like to build something from nothing. She looked at him, and this she said softly, this is something I want to build. Pause. With you. That was it. No extra words. No performance. Just truth. The vows were exchanged. The rings followed. And when the moment came, you may kiss the bride. There was no hesitation. And in that simple, quiet moment, their story shifted again. Not into something new, but into something lasting. The celebration that followed wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't loud or chaotic. Felt grounded. People came to greet them, to congratulate, to understand. Some still carried curiosity. Others carried admiration. But Chioma moved through it all the same way she always had. Calm, present, unchanged. Because no matter how much the world around her shifted, she remained steady. And that steadiness became the foundation of everything that came next. Years passed, not in a rush, not in a blur, but in moments. Their company grew, not just in size but in purpose. The engine they had once struggled to fix became a breakthrough, a standard, a symbol, not just of innovation, but of perspective. Because what made it work wasn't just design, it was understanding. Chioma's influence spread quietly through the company. She didn't take over, didn't demand authority, but people listened because they had learned that she saw things others missed. And Okafor, he changed too, not in a way that removed who he was, but in a way that refined it. He became less rigid, less controlled, more open, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Because somewhere along the way he had learned that strength wasn't just about pushing forward. Sometimes it was about knowing when to slow down. Their home changed as well. What started as a quiet, unfamiliar space for Chioma became something alive, warm, filled with presence. And then it grew again the day their child was born. Everything shifted once more, not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. Okafor stood beside Chioma, holding their child for the first time, carefully, almost uncertainly, not because he didn't know how, but because this felt different from anything he had ever handled before. Chioma watched him, a soft smile on her face. "You'll break him if you hold him like that," she said gently. Okafor glanced at her. "Then show me how to hold him properly." She adjusted his hands slightly. "Relax," she said. "He's stronger than he looks." Okafor looked down at the child, then back at her. "I think I've heard that before," he said. She smiled, and just like that, another quiet moment became something meaningful. Years continued to pass. The world still watched them, still talked, still tried to understand their story. But for them it wasn't complicated. It wasn't about headlines or attention, or what people thought. It was about the life they had built. One evening, long after the company had grown beyond anything they first imagined, Okafor stood by the window again. The same kind of view, the same kind of city, but he wasn't the same man. Chioma walked up beside him. "You're thinking again," she said. He smiled slightly. "Always." Pause. Then he said, "Funny how everything worked out." Chioma looked at him. "It didn't work out." She. He raised an eyebrow. "No." She shook her head. "You just broke down at the right place." He laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. Because every failure, every frustration, every moment that felt like it was falling apart, had led to that one night, that one road, that one moment, where a broken car met the right person, and from that everything changed. Not because it was planned, but because it was understood. And that was the life they built. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to this channel and tell us where you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.